Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Raw Life Health Show. I'm so excited about today's guest. I wrote a book called The Raw Life many years ago, and I interviewed long-term raw fooders. And I interviewed Dr. Doug Graham. And at the time, he had been eating a raw food diet for about 25 years. And this was like 25 years ago. It's been a long time. And I'm so excited to have him today. So say hello, everybody, to Dr. Doug Graham. And hello, Dr. Doug.
Hey, Paul, it's great to see you again. Good to reconnect and glad to be here today.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you here. I've interviewed a lot of people over the years. You were always one of my favorites, and I resonated with a lot of the things that you do and you did. So I'm here because you're living proof of success on a long-term raw food, living foods diet, and I want to discuss that today to help people that are getting into this or doing this to make sure they learn from our mistakes and they just thrive at this.
Sure.
So tell everybody a little about you. How long have you been raw? What made you go raw? And what are you doing now? And then we'll get into some questions.
Gosh, going raw back then wasn't like it is today. It wasn't like, oh, there's a target. Let me go aim for the target. I really didn't know what I was heading towards. Didn't know where I was going. I knew I was moving away from some things that didn't work, and I was moving towards some things that made sense. Every teacher I ever had in school said eat more fruits and vegetables. They still say that, eat more fruits and vegetables. Um, Most people say fruits and vegetables are the most nutritious foods, and I can tell you the names of the people from grammar school onwards that were my nutrition teachers, but it wasn't until college that I really started taking that seriously. And I only did it then because I didn't have the money to buy what were considered the expensive foods, meats and whatnot, dairy. So I switched over to a vegetarian diet. Kind of, they tell you do it for three reasons: the animals, the ethics, the environment, maybe your health even. And and I didn't do it for any of those. I did it because I didn't have the money, which I think is really why most people in the world adopt a primarily vegetarian diet, because that's the only food they can afford. Uh, and even then, it wasn't with any commitment until I met a girl who said she was a vegetarian, and I said, "Oh, so am I." And that was the first time I really connected myself with being something, and and in the food world anyway, uh, and I followed that for a good while. Again, I wasn't tracking it or knowing that later on people would say, "How long have you this, that, or the other?" But it was close to 7 years before I had heard enough things about vegan that I said, okay, enough with vegetarian. It's time for vegan. But I only did vegan for a few months and then went straight into raw vegan. And the reason was because of the model in nature. It just, I heard about it a few times. The first time I heard about it, this guy, Ed, told me about raw foods, and I knew he had to be crazy. Had to be crazy. Why would somebody make raw almond milk when there's perfectly good milk? You know, um, and I didn't see going through all that anyway, because if I wanted milk, I just blended bananas with water. But I didn't think of it as raw foods. It was just bananas and water. And then I started hearing more raw food, raw food. So I said, okay, we'll do it as an experiment. And I tried it for a month as an experiment. But after 2 weeks, such profound change happened that there was no going back. I was already committed. I said, there's no going back. And what I saw was, as I said, the reason was the model in nature. That's what's so prolific, right? Like every single creature eats the raw food diet. But the changes that were so profound to me were a little bit physical, almost exclusively mental. the opening up of awareness. I don't know if you ever have a word on the tip of your tongue, but you can't think of it. You could even define it, but you can't come up with the word. Or if you're having a conversation with people and you just relaxed about it, and then the next thing you look at each other and go, "What were we talking about?" Because you've gone off track a couple of times, and then you can't remember what the original thread was. That used to happen to me all the time. And it just stopped. And I can remember the thread and I can remember the words. And all of a sudden, I could learn more quickly and I could remember things when I learned. And physical skills came better. I was always a accident prone person because I was always pushing my limits. And it took a while before I started realizing that the coordination of my words, my mind, my body, whereas was actually all the same neural net. It was all the same connection. It was all the same coordination. Uh, but things improved in so many ways so quickly. And then the energy came on, and I realized, like, whoa, I've just got basically basically unlimited energy. I can go from not only from can till can't, as the farmers say, but I could, I was getting by on way less sleep and feeling better, performing better, recovering from sport more rapidly. I've always done sport, and I was recovering more rapidly and I was improving, and I was improving in ways that I wasn't expecting based on my age. All of a sudden I was, I ran a run um, when I was just getting into raw foods, and I was 750th out of the 1,500 runners, and 15 years later, I ran the same run after 15 years of raw food, and I was 75th out of 1,500 runners, and I hadn't run much more or focused more, or I'd gone 4 years without running at all during that period of time. It wasn't like it's just things just kept getting better, and I kept seeing crazy fast recovery and having insights like, oh, the recovery that we talk about for people getting out of a hospital or from an illness is the same factors that influence recovery for an athlete, monitored a little bit differently, but the same factors. And if we could put those factors into use for an athlete that we already have in medicine, it should make huge improvements in athletic performance because the gals will recover so much more quickly and can either train harder or more frequently, whichever they want. So we tried that and it worked like a charm. And I started getting a bit of a reputation of working with athletes, and the rest has been history. I've been writing books, continue to write books to this day. Um, been playing around a little bit with audiobooks. Mm, Not get it doesn't get the same response necessarily, but it's a little different putting it together. A lot of people's I'm not thrilled with my voice, but a lot of people they like to say, "Oh, do it in your own voice." So that's been an interesting experiment. I got to do more of those. And I'd say the biggest thing between cooked food and raw food was the energy, the health, the motivation. Like I've got the energy and the health and the motivation to just keep going. I love I love that I can be valuable to people and productive. Those two things are incredibly meaningful. And you know, um, because in the last 20 years, you gained 20 years just like I did, that as we get older, remaining valuable and remaining productive becomes increasingly important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what is your age now?
I'm 69 right this very second.
And so when we talk about raw, when you got into raw food, did you automatically go to 100% raw, or did you have a transition period?
Huge long transition period. not only a huge long transition period, because 100% raw um, was almost an unknown target. There wasn't people talking about 100% raw 100% of the time. There wasn't a mass. It was a timing thing, in 1895 there was 5,000 people in the Chicago Raw Food Organization. Chicago only had 50,000 people. That's 1 out of 10 was part of the organization. It is just astonishing. But that all shut down with the whole raw food movement of the late 1800s shut down uh, when the medical establishment, or possibly just Rockefeller, introduced the idea of germs. Funny, we're seeing that happen again, oppression again with the idea of germs. So we fall for the same thing. But it wasn't an because I didn't know where I was going and I didn't see it at first. So I just started doing more raw and more raw. Um, when I made the commitment to go all raw, I didn't know how. I honestly, I honestly did not know how, and I tried a lot of different things. Uh, I tried a fantastic amount of salad. I tried eating. Um, I didn't specifically try eating lots of fats, but certainly ate lots of fats. Uh, I could go raw. I eventually made the commitment to go all raw about 6 years in to eating raw foods.
Where were you living at that time?
I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, uh, but about to move to Florida, but I didn't know it.
So and so since you've made that commitment after 6 years of not
Yeah.
100% raw, have you had some not raw food, or has it been uh,
Oh yeah, there was another 7 years of figuring out how to make it work because I didn't know how to make it work. It made sense to me. It made sense. And it took me another 6 or 7 years to work out the science. And because there was lots of people using the idea of a low fat diet. And there were plenty of vegan doctors talking about a low fat diet. And in 1959, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, there was an article about low fat being instrumental in reducing diabetes. So, I mean, it's not a new idea, but nobody had applied it to raw foods. And as you know, the raw food diet typically was one of two things. It was either very high supplements and condiments and stimulants and irritants, or it was a lot of fat and grass and salt. Now, those were your options. And and what I saw is a lot of raw fooders get very excited about raw food, but they didn't stay in it for very long. They'd stay in it for a while. They would be on and off it. They would be quiet about their cooked food interludes. Um, and I was very disillusioned. I went to an event where it was all the raw food teachers. It seemed like of the whole world came together. And after the event ended, they all went out for Mexican food, and and a few of them weren't even vegan. And I passed on the meal, but after the meal, we got back together at the beach, and they were all just complaining it was too hot, and they didn't have any energy to go do stuff. I wanted to go play, and they didn't want to play with me, and it was no fun. But it was an eye opening experience, and I realized, like, okay, it's one thing to walk the walk, it's another thing to talk the talk, and they're really separate. Uh, and again, as you know, most of the leaders of the raw food movement at the time told me, "Hey, what you're doing can't possibly work. Oh yeah, it'll work for a little while, but it won't work long term." And I don't know. I'm still waiting for long term to kick in because it's still working. And what I found was that if I didn't eat enough fruit, I ended up going off the raw food diet, and I'd start eating starch. And And as you asked, did I go all raw? No, I didn't go all raw in the first 6 years, and it took me another 6 or 7 years to figure out how to stay all raw. Every time I'd go raw, I'd go, "Hey, I've done it for a week," and then I'd be off. "Oh, I've done it for a month," and then I'd be off. I went 9 months one time, um, in the middle '80s. I went 9 months without eating any cooked food, and then my activity levels, I went through an 18-day program where my activity levels were just insane, just 5 6,000 calories a day, and I just kept eating my three, and by the time 18 days had gone by, I was in such a deep deficit that I just ate anything that wasn't nailed down. Basically, it was still vegan, but cooked vegan. I went back and I go, I can't believe I'm falling for this again. What am I doing wrong? Uh, and that's when the light bulb went on finally, that if I don't eat enough fruit, I will fall to starches every single time.
That's excellent, and I can give you confirmation that a lot of people I've spoken to that know what they're talking about say the same thing. It's either fruit or starches. And now, so after those initial 13 years of figuring it out, the first 6 years and then seven, so then once you figured it out, how's that been? Have you had any struggles, or once you figured it out, it was a breeze from there?
It's just a breeze. The only thing was learning how much fruit is enough fruit. And this take because there was no examples. I went to all the raw food leaders. I asked them. I'm not a pro athlete, but I'm a fairly athletic guy, and I'm healthy, and I want to eat raw foods. Um, what would the diet be? And they go, well, for an athlete, it would definitely be raw, but we have no idea how to design the program. I mean, we've only helped sick people get well. The only people ever interested in raw food were sick people trying to get well. Your own story. And um, and I go, great. I got to figure this out on my own. And so I honestly just went back to the nutrition books, and I went back to the sports science books, and the vegan leaders, and everybody said eat 80 10 10. They all said eat a it's interesting they call it a low fat diet because it's not low. It's a normal fat diet. Low implies a problem, like, hey, I'm low on gas, I need to go get gas. Uh, or your blood work and your iron levels came out low. That implies a problem. Uh, low low in this case is only low compared to everybody else who are actually eating a high fat diet. 10% of calories from fat, 15% of calories from fat. This is the amount of fat where humans thrive. This is where our blood work comes out normal. This is where triglyceride levels come out normal. This is where cholesterol comes out normal. This is where oxygen transfer happens between the bloodstream and the cells at optimal levels. This is where glucose transfers from the bloodstream into the cells with the least amount of insulin possible. I mean, no diabetes unless you don't make insulin in the first place. All the right things happen. This is where cancer can't even get a grasp on things because it's such a high oxygen rich environment. So we see all the right things happen, from heart health and on through the list. I just i just happened to be the first guy to write it down and say, you know what, if you eat this much fruit, so that most of your calories are coming from carbohydrates from fruit, and you eat some vegetables, all the vegetables you want, so you don't crave salt. If you eat enough fruit so you don't crave sugar ever, before, during, or after meals, if you eat enough fruit so you're not looking for starch, you're not looking for something heavy at the end of the meal, you satiated yourself with fruit, which is the whole point of eating, is to satiate yourself, and and eat enough vegetables so you're not craving salt, you're pretty well done. You eat to be thrilled. I'm not saying we shouldn't absolutely love the taste. Of course we should love the taste. We should be like, it's heavenly over and over and over again. But if we eat enough fruit to satisfy ourselves, this is what it comes out to be. And the roughly what it comes out to be is 80-10-10. And I started looking at what do the top athletes eat, the top runners, the Kenyan runners eat very close to 80-10-10, and the long-lived blue zone people of the world, almost all of them eat very close to 80-10-10. And then I started looking at what the other anthropoid primates eat, and they all eat very close to 80-10-10. So I just coined the phrase and called it the 80-10-10 diet, uh, as opposed to calling it the Doug Graham diet.
Yes, yes. So do you think the raw food diet is best for everyone when you take into not just the physical, the emotional, and the social aspects? Do you think it's the best for everyone?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think it's best for everyone. I think it's best for people, but it's not best for dogs. It's not best for cats
Well,
or
for people,
fish.
do you think? Oh,
Oh, people, yeah, human beings are designed for 80-10-10. Absolutely. I don't see any variance among within our species. Our blood work works the same, oxygen transfer, uh, all the pancreatic
well, you're talking about
enzymes.
nutritionally, it's best for everyone, but I'm talking about considering the social
Right.
aspect and other.
Wouldn't it be a horror if our natural diet was really good for us health-wise or nutritionally, but it wasn't good for our teeth or it wasn't good for our emotions? No, I don't see it that way, Paul. I see it as a one diet fits all, just like I see clean air as best for human beings. All human beings do better on clean air than they do on dirty air. All human beings do best with enough sleep as opposed to not enough sleep or too much sleep. We all do best um, in a social with some social interaction. And we find that people who totally become hermits typically go nuts, and whether they're infants going nuts by being ignored, or adults who are choose to ignore the rest of the world, we lose touch.
Oh,
And as far as nutritionally, I call it species specific. In the world of science, certainly we look at what an animal eats based on what species they are, not whether they're um, emotionally frail or physically huge. I mean, a small cow eats the same as a big cow, maybe eats more, but the same. And we do it species specific for sure. For humans, granted, if we get fancy enough with our technology, we can see that although all of us are Homo sapiens, some of us have little bits of other Homo species in us because there was some mixing and mingling that went on in our past. Um, and so Homo erectus or some of the other Homos, there were 7 or 8 other Homo species. And we all carry a little of that as well. But all of them were designed to eat fruits and vegetables as well. So it doesn't shift what is the appropriate diet. And I know different people have different thoughts on that. And yes, you can numb yourself down for periods of time by eating more fats or um, shifting your diet in various ways. And certainly within 80-10-10, this is why I say it's not a pinpoint. Some people do better on 5%, 6% of their calories from fat. Some people do better on 15, but it all hovers around that 10% mark. Yes.
great. So, how long after you figure this out, for the viewers, numbers wise? I mean, I know many people after they do this for 20 years, they just stop counting. But how long have you been 100% raw? How would you say?
I don't know, what time is it? um,
Roughly, I
I'd
know
say,
we don't want to pinpoint, and I don't want viewers to like start doing math, but in general,
yeah. Um, it's 30 plus years and I'm not looking back.
wonderful. And from
Yeah.
a health standpoint, I know your health is in great shape. So, how much sleep do you like to get every night?
I like to get enough sleep. And sometimes it surprises me that I wake up, wow, so awake, um, on less sleep than I thought I was going to need. But it's funny because the diet, a lot of people want to blame or credit the diet for everything, and I don't look at it as diet is everything. Diet is a thing. If I want to increase my sleep needs, I can up my physical activities, get really aggressive in physical exertions. My need for sleep goes up. Emotional turmoil, my need for sleep goes up. Um, so, so many factors, even in the world of nutrition, uh, we we don't get all our nutrients from food. You know, sunlight gives us D, and microbes give us B12, and emotions can blow through vitamin C at unbelievable high rates. So I don't credit food for everything. It's just one of the factors that has to be right.
So give us like for me, I've interviewed people and some people long-term raw food say, "Oh, I only need 4 hours of sleep a night," and so on. For me, I know that. I mean, I work really hard. I love to exercise. I can get by on 6 hours, 5 hours, but I definitely prefer to get 7 or 8 if I can. For
Yeah, I'm in
me,
the same boat, Paul. I'd
okay,
say I'm in
yeah,
pretty much the same range. I know if I'm around a lot of other people, I typically sleep less than they do. I'm usually the last one to sleep and the first one up, but not always. So, I mean, it's great to roll over when you have the option. When you'd rather roll over than roll out, it's really nice. But when I was eating cooked food, it definitely
oh
needed
yeah,
8 to 9,
yeah,
whereas now that 7 to 8 range does the job.
yes. And so you and I, like, I know you ended up moving to South Florida to the Keys after you figured all this out and you created an environment for yourself where you can get high quality fruit. But the average person has not created that environment for themselves. So, do you think there's a difference doing this with that high quality fruit versus store bought fruit? Do you think it makes, how much of a difference do you think it makes, or if at all?
It's hard to put a number on the difference, but it's always different. Homegrown food always tastes better. It's just garden fresh food always tastes better. I got lettuce going in my garden right now that beats any lettuce I can buy anywhere.
Well, I know it tastes better, but what about nutritionally? Do you think it
Well, I think it tastes better, um, and without doing chemistry, I think that that taste is a very clear cut indication of nutritional quality going on. Um, I don't doubt that quality has to be compromised in order to get. Okay, I got strawberries in my garden. When I pick them, they keep for about 12 hours. But if I buy strawberries in the grocery store, it's a different variety and it'll keep for 3 days. How is that possible? What, right? Um, is that just nutrition? Well, something changed something was compromised in order to extend shelf life. And I think what was compromised was the quality of the fruit, including the nutritional quality. But the cool thing is, I don't think that that matters at all to, I'm going to say to most people, but that includes you and me as most people. I don't think it matters at all in terms of high end performance, high end health, nutritional value. And here's why: our neighbors are eating fast food out of chain stores, and we're worrying about whether we're getting 99% or 100% or 99.2 or 99.8 of the nutrients in our food. Our next door neighbors are getting 3%, and we're worrying about 99.2 or 99.4 or 99.6. I don't think we need to worry. Food always tastes better out of the garden, and it's more nutritious when it's fresh, when it's not when it's locally grown. That doesn't automatically imply more nutrition, except for the fact that it's locally grown, which means it's likely very fresh. But my bananas here in England are not locally grown. I'm living in England. England imports food from more countries than any country in the world. So I actually have year round better access to variety of food than you do. But you obviously have access to better mangoes during mango season than I do. Fine. I'll compromise that. But I have access to mangoes 365 days a year and have for 20 years here in England. You don't have that access in Florida, but you have better mangoes during mango season. So there's a plus and a minus to both ways of going about it. For sure, when I go to the tropics, I enjoy the tropical food fresh off the trees. But here I am in England and I can get all of those foods, but they have to be imported. But man, I'll tell you what, I had some Musang King durian the other day. Oh my gosh, so good, Musang King. Really great variety of fruit.
Yeah. From my experience, I didn't know I was successfully doing a 100% raw vegan diet in New York in a cold environment, eating nothing freshly grown. I didn't know what good fruit was until I
Mm-hmm.
came down to Florida and I started growing my own fruit. And
Mm-hmm.
from my experience, I have found the problem with store-bought fruit, and the reason why it lasts so long is most of it's picked unripe, and and that's an issue because and this is one of the reasons I see that people fail at doing a 80-10-10 or even a raw food diet in general is because 95% of their diet are eating unripe food. And I know if
Well,
I'm
I'm
picking,
not recommending eating unripe fruit,
yeah,
Paul, and I don't want to cut you off. I agree
sure.
with you. I agree with you that people will fail eating unripe fruit, but I'm not recommending eating unripe fruit. And we do want to become aware of which fruits ripen after they're picked and which ones
Well, they all
won't.
ripen. Let's say not unripe. Let's say picked unripe. They don't. There's just something about them when they're picked ripe. Like even take a banana for example.
How
When you
about
get
an
a
avocado? Let's take an avocado,
well,
for
avocado
example.
is one fruit that ripens off the tree, not on the
Oh,
tree.
how about a
That's a little
pear?
different.
Let's take a pear for an example.
Okay, take a pear for example.
Pears are better picked unripe and ripening off the tree than they are if you wait on the tree. And the likelihood is that the squirrels or the birds will eat it first anyway.
But even though
So,
a pear, yeah, but even though a pear picked unripe off a tree, there's still a stage you pick it, and if you pick it too soon, you're stopping that fruit from getting all the nutrients.
well,
And
for sure. But if you pick any fruit too soon, that's true. And if you pick it too soon, it'll never come ripe. But I agree with you, Paul, that when I grew my own pineapple, or when I'm in Costa Rica, I just happen to stay in a place where around the corner, 100 yards away, there's a guy growing organic pineapple. He brings them to me in a wheelbarrow, half a dozen at a time in a wheelbarrow on a piece of foam rubber so he can go down the bumpy dirt road without bruising the fruit. And and it almost makes you not want to ever eat a pineapple from anybody else ever again. But I'm telling you, I'm getting really, really good Costa Rican pineapple here in England, and it's pretty amazing. And I'm thrilled to eat it. And no, not every single one is as good as what Bolivar grows for me down in Costa Rica, but some of them are magnificent, surprisingly good. And I personally, I don't think that that's why people fail, is because of the small nutrient difference. I don't think we're that close to the edge of failure or success when we switch to a raw food diet predominated by fruits and vegetables. When the calorie domination is fruits and vegetables, I think we are onto such safe ground nutritionally that you could do just fine in New York City as a raw fooder. But you're also breathing New York City air, and you're also hearing New York City noise, and you're also subjecting yourself to the stresses of New York City traffic and New York City life. It's not just the food. So, and there's no way um, to do the experiment, right? To have the New York City life down in
Yeah,
Florida. So I think that nutritionally, we're we're so far from having problems that if you didn't grow your own food, life wouldn't be as good, and you might not enjoy the. I mean, your taste buds pick out things that most people don't know exist. You fine tuned that ability by eating fruit for so many years. But if you hadn't, we just can't say that, Paul, because we know for sure that people go raw, and within a few days, especially if they make that overnight change, within a few days they're experiencing a completely different life.
completely different. 100% agree. Yeah.
And so I think that when we talk about the difference between growing your own fruit, which I'm in favor of, and growing your own vegetables too, for that matter, but growing your own fruit, um, and not doing so is a nuance. I think it's a nuance as opposed to um, we're watching people just read 80-10-10 or read the raw life and say, okay, let me see what happens when I try the raw life. And within days, they're like, they have a YouTube channel that's flourishing because their life has been completely changed. They've healed from this, that, and the next. That happened on store bought food.
Yeah, it's interesting. I met a farmer once in Ohio, and he said his unorganic food has more nutrients than his organic food. And I actually, when I go to the store now, if I do have to buy strawberries, the organic strawberries are completely almost inedible, but the organic ones, I mean the unorganic ones, taste pretty well. And it's
Yeah,
a trade-off almost, like you're trading off the organic for the pesticides for the taste and probably the nutrients, and it's very interesting.
yeah.
And each fruit is
You
different.
hate to make that trade. You
Yeah,
hate to make that trade, and in your dense gardening scheme, finding room to grow your own strawberries is well
yeah.
worth it.
But each
You
fruit
can
is
grow
each,
great strawberries in Florida and grow your own. And I'll tell you what, man, when you pick your own,
yeah,
they'll be even better, another level of better. But again, even here, when I grow my own, and I've grown maybe a dozen different varieties of the hundreds or thousands to choose from. But I've grown about a dozen different varieties, and every one is quite remarkably different
yes,
from the other.
yes,
You have to choose what you like. I mean, not everybody is going to like the same mango, which is why there's so many varieties. I've had plenty of people turn up their nose at varieties that I thought were the best.
yes. It's taste is subjective, absolutely, and it's true. So I love what you do. You have taken this from a sports uh, fitness standpoint and applied the raw diet, and it's helped me. I mean, I had a picture when I started raw diet of you and Tim Trader, because you guys were because fitness. Even though I got into this because I had a disease, but fitness was always my goal. And one of my greatest memories was working out with Tim Trader at the gym, and also doing stuff with you, exercising. I just love that motivation. Do you think the 80-10, and we know 80-10-10 100% is best for athletes or people fitness minded, but there are, like you said, other people get into this because they suffered a disease, and they gave up on doctors, and they realized that healing takes place when you follow the concepts of nature and so on. Do you think when it comes to a disease, the numbers are need to be adjusted based on that particular situation, or do you think it's a one set for all, whether you're getting into this for athletics or disease, or do you think there needs to be some adjustment based on the particular type of disease and what somebody's dealing with? And let me give you one little example: is I had ulcerative colitis. So I don't tell anyone with ulcerative colitis to eat salad until they're better because the roughage isn't good for them.
Correct.
So there needs to be some adjustment when your body's not working the way it should.
Of
Uh,
course.
so maybe diabetes and other things, or cancer and other things. Do you think the numbers are a little different based on a particular diet? I mean,
Okay.
situation.
So the question is our diet species specific? And the answer has to be yes, because every species has a specific diet, and we should be no different in that regard. Is taste subjective? Yes. Are food preferences subjective? Yes. Is mouthfeel and texture different experience for each person? And again, yes. Are there times when you need more sleep, times when you need less? Yes. Times when you need more turning inward and times when you need more outward social experience? Yes. Are there times when you feel like you need more rest and times where you need, like, I really need to be active today. I need to put in some hours of activity? Yes. Uh, are there times when you're ill when you probably aren't going to eat anything at all or very little of anything or can barely handle anything? Yes. Are we always adapting? So the difference between the medical model and the health model says the medical model says do things differently when you're sick than when you're well. So take drugs when you're sick, but say no to drugs when you're healthy. Um, or drink milk when you're healthy, but milk will congest you when you're sick. The health model says that we do the same things in the same ways all the time, always, whether you're sick or well, but you all the time customize and adapt to the needs and preferences of the individual at any given time. So, this is why I say that 80-10-10 is not a numeric fixture, but it's a guideline. There's times where, look, when you're eating nothing but fruit and you're trying to heal from this or that condition, and fruit is the only thing you can tolerate, you're eating roughly 95/5, which is well within the parameters of the definition of 80-10-10. It's less than 10. when you're when you're being a heavy duty strength athlete, there's no cardio in your life at all. uh, you're emotionally this, you're whatever, you're trying to gain some bulk or some mass or some whatever you're trying to gain, and you're eating 15% fat, you're letting yourself go nuts, as it were, you know, and you're digestively you can handle it, which I don't handle nuts well, but you're doing that and you're eating what, 85 or 10 and 15, maybe 75, 10, 15, and you still are close enough to 80-10-10 because that range from 5 to 20 or so, the average person's eating 45 to 50% of their calories from fat. When we cut that in half twice, now we're down into the healthy range. And so there's plenty of room for a range. You've got to customize to the individual needs at all times. I had a friend come to my house one time. He came from India. He wanted to eat nothing but mangoes. I asked him, I said, Florida's got the best mangoes. I'm convinced it's better than India. And What do you want? He goes, I don't want anything but mango. I'm going to be with you for a week. I just want to eat mangoes. I got him 21 different kinds of mangoes to try. I'm excited to give him mangoes the best Florida could offer. And I gave him mangoes with other things for breakfast, lunch, and dinner 3 days in a row. And on the fourth morning, he said, hey, could I just have like a pita and almond butter sandwich, please? I don't want any more mango. Shocked the heck out of me. I couldn't imagine growing tired of mango during mango season. It's a short season. But he had grown tired of it. At that time, at that point, you got to bend with the flex with the needs of the individual. So for sure, we're not saying, and I'll give you one more example from nature. There's an animal that lives in the tropics called a sloth. And the sloth hangs upside down in the trees and eats leaves. And he's a mammal. And a typical sloth eats about 30 different kinds of leaves. But if you look at a square mile of jungle and the sloths in that square mile, you'll find that they eat more than 100 different leaves between them. But different sloths prefer different leaves. And it and that's just great that you maybe prefer a different variety of mango than I prefer, because I can have more of the carries. And you can have more of the lemon
Zest.
zests. You can have more of the lemon zests. And you don't mind that I eat all the carries off the tree because you wanted the lemon zests. But we both ended up eating fruit, and we both ended up eating mango even. But but my sister, if I offer her papaya or mango, she'll take papaya every single time. Like I'm like wondering what's wrong with
What's
her.
wrong with people, right?
But she'll take papaya every single time. And I've done this experiment with her. And she's thrilled that I'm happy with mango because she can have more of the papaya.
I actually know people in New York. My own twin sister, she's never tasted a mango. She says, "Is that thing they have in the store?" I'm like, but then I thought when I was in New York until I was 20 years old, I never had a mango.
Exactly.
And so it's just now it's just amazing. And by the way, I have a big cherry tree right outside my window. It's like my biggest tree. It's just
Well, it's we're still 16 years away, I think, or 15 years away from the Carrie's 100th anniversary. It was a backyard fruit
yeah.
for almost 60 years before it became at all popular. But I'm glad that it did become popular.
You know,
Another Zill product.
yes, yes. So I have a problem with fruit, and I done some interviews on my website that you'd really appreciate. Uh, some people tell me I don't want to say they're against fruit, but they're against sugar of all types. They don't understand, I believe, that there's a difference in the sugar from fruit versus processed sugar, but they kind of group it up in one. But they say that fruit is 100 times sweeter today than it was years ago. Now, my
Mm.
friend has a organic mango grove, and some of the trees there are 100 years old, and I've tasted those mangoes. And yes, there's a wider selection and maybe sweeter selections chosen today. However, but those mangoes are not 100 times less sweeter. Those mangoes are extremely sweet. So I have an issue when people say things like that. And man intervention has not changed, added sweetness. Just the selection might have been with selecting the sweeter ones, but that man intervention hasn't changed. So what do you say to that? Do you think fruit is sweeter today than it was 100 years ago?
I think you almost nailed it on the head, Paul, that we have created a few varieties. So when I was a boy, there was no ruby red grapefruit, and now there is. So there's a sweeter grapefruit. Um, the the Walla Walla onion and the Bermuda onion and some of the others what are called sweet onions are all relatively new varieties. And within strawberries and apples, if you look at apples, for example, where there's 40,000 apple varieties, most of the sweetest ones are the newest ones. And they're a little bit sweeter. But if you did basic math and found a caveman living on bananas, even 100 years ago, if you could, he was going to have to eat 30 bananas to get his 3,000 calories. But if today's banana is actually even just 30 times sweeter than the bananas of 100 years ago, that caveman would have had to eat 900 bananas a day. And that's just not possible. Cool Hand Luke isn't eating 900 bananas a day. So there are a lot of people saying a lot of things that if you actually do the math, the physical math, it can't possibly be true. Somebody explained to me the other day that we lose a bunch of nutrients when we cut with a metal knife as compared to when we cut with a ceramic knife. We just lose so much nutrients. And I'm going, okay, which nutrients? How much of those nutrients? If you cut an apple in half with a ceramic knife, how much nutrients does it actually lose that it didn't, that it would have, that it doesn't lose off a ceramic knife, that it does off a metal knife? Which nutrients? How much of them? What percentage of them? And where did the nutrients go? Like, where did they go? You hear the same thing about blending, Paul. People say, oh, you lose 88% of the nutrients when you blend. Well, water's a nutrient. You don't lose 88% of the water when you blend. Fiber's a nutrient. You don't lose 88% of the fiber. There's lots of other minerals are all nutrients. And as far as I know, you lose zero minerals when you blend food. So we have to take some of what we hear and hold it up to critical thinking skills enough to move forward bravely. As you are well aware, a tremendous number of people told me my diet can't possibly work long term. And that was 40 years ago. And some of those people are back into the raw food movement because it was undeniably the way to go. Most of those people proved that their version of raw food couldn't possibly be sustainable. No matter how much excitement and enthusiasm or money they made, they couldn't sustain it. And they ended up having to go back to a high fruit-based diet. It's got to be a fruit-based diet if you want a long-term, healthy, raw vegan approach. I'm not saying everybody needs to eat the fruit-based diet, only if they want to be super healthy. You don't have to
Sure.
want to be super healthy.
So what I found out there's a lot of people say, oh, because the GMOs fruit is sweeter today. There's only a handful of fruits that are genetically modified, and the most of the fruit. You see what the way it is, everybody is. If a plant is hybridized, you'll get the same fruit of. I'm sorry, if a plant is grafted, you'll get the same fruit as what was planted. But if you take a seed and plant a seed, most fruit is not true to seed. So you're going to get a new variety. And of those new varieties, the selection of those, the sweeter ones that are selected are the ones that become populated. And that's how you get sweeter fruit in your local supermarket. It's not man intervention. Now, you could use some hybridization in terms of this variety and this variety will plant it next to together, and the bees pollinated a particular two sweet varieties to make an even sweeter variety. But to that degree, it's not genetically modifying it. It's not
And that only
unhealthy.
happens with some fruit, like a
Yeah,
date. That'll happen with dates. We
yeah,
can cross pollinate with dates and end up with a sweeter variety, even sweeter variety.
yeah.
But
But
with a
that's
lot
not
of
a bad
foods,
thing. It's not a bad thing. That's what I'm telling
oh,
people.
no, no, no. Cross pollination is a normal thing. Hybridization is a normal
Yeah,
thing. Um, in fact, every child that ever went to school learned that hybridization is normal because what they learned in school was that there were single cell organisms that eventually became more complex and crawled out of the sea and started flying through the sky and went back in and became amphibian and eventually evolved into man himself. And whether we buy evolution or whether we buy creation or whether we buy create evolution, where there's both things happening, um, it doesn't really matter. all of us know that the original, whatever life was, the original life, isn't here anymore, can't be found. We're all hybrids. And if you're not a hybrid, um, then your mother and father were identical twins. That wouldn't work well either.
Yeah. So, but my point being is, stay away from those few foods that are genetically modified. They're just you
GMOs to
want
be
to avoid
avoided.
them. But most fruits aren't, and it's just wonderful. So a couple of things you mentioned, people are going to want to know. This is a great interview. Thank you for taking the time to do this. You mentioned blended food. Technology has really come a long way. Have you heard of vacuum blending or experimenting with it at all?
Sure.
Have you noticed a difference when you use a vacuum blender than using just a standard like Vitamix in terms of the color, the flavor, and how long, much more longer the food lasts?
Well, so it's a yes and no, Paul. First of all, when I blend like, I'm done blending. I don't use a blender a lot. I use a food processor quite a bit because it helps me with cucumbers and a few other vegetables, celery, so I can make a slaw pretty easily rather than cutting with a knife all day. Uh, but I don't use a blender a lot. But if I do use a blender, maybe I'm taking maybe I'm taking two fruits and blending them in order to make a salad dressing. Well, we're talking about 2 seconds, 1, 2, 3 seconds. And in those instances, no, I don't see any difference, except for how long it would keep. But I'm not trying to keep it longer than, I mean, I'm making food for the coming meal. I'm not making food for next week.
Yeah,
So how long my food, I mean, we do the experiment at Culinary Skills Week every year where we take an immersion blender, what you might call a stick blender, and blend some bananas and water with a stick blender and blend some bananas and water in a cavitation blender. Whether it's immersion or not, the stick blender does better because there's no oxygen being introduced at all, not even the oxygen that's in the blender. And so, uh, but nobody wants to eat the smoothie 6 hours later just because you know,
yeah,
it's more tan or less tan. I'm making a smoothie. I'm going to drink the smoothie instantly. If I'm going to blend bananas and water, I'm going to drink it instantly, and I'm only going to blend it for 3 or 4 seconds because that's all it takes. So yes, if you're going to blend for 2 minutes and make hot soup, perhaps a vacuum blender is a better way to go. If you're going to take that hot soup, wait until it cools, then you're going to freeze it, then you're going to thaw it, then you're going to. I mean, I don't know, but it's if you own if you own a vacuum blender and you're thrilled with it, more power to you. If The biggest innovation that I've seen on blenders for me that were worth the money, other than immersion blenders, has been covers for blenders. So my blender comes with a complete cover that goes over it,
that
and
stays on.
it's almost soundproof.
Oh, okay.
So when I close that door, I put the cap, put it in, close the door, turn on the blender, and continue having a conversation in the room. Um, and that reduction in sound has been the biggest improvement. And to me, maybe for a lot of people, if they've seen me, because I've done quite a few cooking shows or food prep shows, and when I blend, I put ear protectors on for that 15 seconds if I had to blend something for a long time. Um, Now I just put the cover on. I don't have to use ear protectors. But with a loud blender, I think the noise of that blender might be more harmful to us than any nutrient loss that might come from blending.
All right, a couple more topics I want to discuss before we end
Okay,
here. And
sure.
so you mentioned if people they're either doing fruit or starch. Now,
Yeah.
from the starch standpoint, we know there's a
Or fat, lots and lots and lots of fat for a short period of time, but then
okay.
it goes back to fruit or starch.
Okay, so for the starch, we know like the cooked starches and we know the grains and these things. And you wrote a wonderful book called Grain Damage and so on. But are there any raw food starches that you're talking about? Or are you
No,
talking about
because we can't
basically cooked
digest
food?
them.
You're talking about cooked food carbohydrates versus fruit
Sure,
carbohydrates.
sure, because when you eat a banana, some of the sugar that's in the banana hasn't yet converted from the starch storage form to the glucose and fructose that we would find in a banana. A very, very small amount, but the starch is there. And in order to digest that 1 calorie, say, of starch, we produce an enzyme in our mouth called ptyalin, salivary amylase, in order to deal with that one. But if you try to eat a really unripe green banana, you will notice right away that it creates a very unpleasant feeling in your mouth. It's astringent, it feels terrible, it tastes terrible. If you take a mouthful of cornstarch, a spoonful of cornstarch, it'll sit in your mouth for 30 or 60 seconds and you still can't digest it. Effectively, compared to most of the animal kingdom, um, we produce about as much starch digesting enzyme as they do, which is next to none. There are very few natural starch eaters in the animal kingdom. But we can eat the tiny bit that we might find in an unripe fruit, and we survive it. But it's one of the ways we can tell if fruit is ripe or not. Is how does it feel as soon as you put it in your mouth? If it's astringent, not whether it's a persimmon or a banana, it's not a pleasant experience. So we respect that, and we wait until the fruit ripens. Uh, And there are some foods that contain a tiny bit of starch. You might say a carrot. Oh, a carrot. Well, what's the taste people are looking for in a carrot? They go, oh, this carrot's really sweet. Oh, great. We're looking for the sweet. We're naturally sweet seekers. And when your children were infants and they would put things in their mouth to find out whether it was sweet or not, and that's how you know if it's food. If it tastes sweet, it's food. So this is our method of knowing how do we find food. We're naturally inclined to eat sweet and juicy. Mother's milk is sweet and juicy, but then we um, somehow got swayed away from sweet and juicy fruit, and we got shifted over to milk and cookies, ice cream and cake, hot chocolate and donuts, whatever it was, and we get our sweet and juicy in that way. But we're all naturally sweet and lovers of sweet and juicy. So it doesn't mean that there can't be any starch in our food. That's not what starch eating I'm talking about. You just like, hey, a watermelon has protein in it, but we don't think of it as a high protein food. But it has protein in it. Every cell of everything alive has protein. We'll find a little bit of starch. In fact, the cell walls of all plants are made up of starch. So
The starches you were talking about are the cooked starches, like the
yes,
yeah.
because we caramelize the starches and we dextrinize the starches in order to make them edible through the production or through the application of heat, as opposed to the starch that's in the skin of a tomato or the starch that's in the cell walls of plants. As you say, that starch is known as fiber. It's indigestible fiber because human beings cannot digest starch. We don't have the starch digesting enzymes. We can't digest fiber, and we're not supposed to. That fiber works to our advantage, both the soluble and the insoluble fibers, to keep our intestines functioning properly, to to normalize the speed of the flow of food, hence the uptake of nutrients from our intestines.
Sure.
Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show. Raw Life, brighten up your life.